Day 8 of Browns camp gave us one of those practices where the tape says one thing and the room says another, and I want to walk you through exactly why that gap matters, because it's not just about one practice anymore. It's about how this entire quarterback competition is being framed for the public before the actual decision even gets made. Cleveland wrapped up the install phase of camp on Thursday, which means everything from here forward gets a little more live, a little more competitive, a little less about teaching concepts, and a little more about seeing who can actually go out and win a rep. Stefanski's staff has said practices from this point are going to lean more into run game insertions, play action off those runs, and repeat concepts the offense has already installed, which basically means less walkthrough energy and more live bullets. That context matters heading into what I'm about to show you, because this is exactly the point in camp where separation starts happening for real. Let's start with the box score version, because you need it before I tell you why I don't fully trust it. Shedeur Sanders finished 11 of 16 with a touchdown and an interception. Deshaun Watson also went 11 of 16, no touchdowns, and officially just one pick. Gabriel was 6 of 9, clean, no touchdowns, no turnovers. Bailey Green barely touched the field with the ones, mostly showing up in short yardage and goal line work, which tells you the staff already has a defined role in mind for him, even if it's a small one right now. Here's the problem. Watson didn't throw one interception on Thursday. He threw 2. I watched both, and I'm going to break them down for you, because the discrepancy between what actually happened on the grass and what got logged in an official tracker is exactly the kind of thing that shapes a false narrative before fans even get a chance to see the film for themselves. The first one was clean defense, not a bad play necessarily, but a real interception. Tyson Campbell read it, closed, and took it away in 7-on-7. That one's on the tracker. Fine. The second one is the one that got left off, and it's the more damning throw of the two. Watson targeted Gage LaRue on a shot down the field, and LaRue had separation. I'm talking close to 5 yards on the defensive back. This should have been an explosive play, maybe a touchdown if the ball is placed correctly. Instead, the throw was underthrown so badly that LaRue had to stop his route, turn all the way around, and go up for a jump ball just to have a chance at it. If that pass is on time and out in front, that's 6 points, easy. Instead, it's a live turnover that somehow never made it onto the sheet. Now think about what that means practically. If you're a fan scrolling through a QB tracker graphic, you see Watson at 1 interception, and you walk away thinking he had a clean, mistake-free day. That's not what happened. He threw the ball to the wrong team twice. And when a tracking error like that happens in a camp where every single rep is being used to build a narrative about who should be QB1, accuracy in reporting isn't a small thing. It's the whole ballgame. Because here's what Shedeur Sanders did on the other side of that same practice. He didn't have a good day. He had one of those days you point back to in October when people ask when you first believed in him. Start with the touchdown corner route to Jeudy, 25 yards. And I want you to actually understand the process behind it, not just the result, because this is where people who don't watch film closely miss what's really going on. Cleveland motions Harris across the formation before the snap. That motion isn't decoration, it's information. When the defense follows Harris across the field, it tells Shedeur immediately that he's looking at man coverage, so now before the ball is even snapped, he already knows what he's got. He uses play action to hold the defense for half a beat, steps up in the pocket, and delivers a corner route into a window that only exists because he diagnosed the coverage before the snap and manipulated it after. That's not luck. That's not a receiver bailing out a quarterback with a spectacular catch. That's a young passer reading a defense in real time and getting the ball to the right access point. Then there's the 20-yard dig to Jeudy, and after that, a slant that's smaller in yardage but just as instructive, because you can actually watch him read leverage pre-snap. He's watching the corner shadow the receiver's alignment. He identifies man coverage again, and he trusts Jeudy to win a one-on-one rep at the line. Jeudy stems the route, gets on top of his man, and Shedeur puts the ball where only he can catch it. If you've ever heard someone say this kid can't read coverage, can't process pre-snap information, doesn't understand what a defense is showing him, this is the drive where all three of those claims get exposed as lazy talking points. He set up motion reads, he manipulated leverage, and he delivered with anticipation instead of hesitation. That's advanced quarterback play, not system luck. And then in 7-on-7, there's a rep that doesn't show up as flashy on a highlight reel but tells you just as much. Motion with Luke Farrell, some form of play action, Shedeur reads it and finds Isaiah Bond in the flat-off design rather than forcing a low-percentage shot down the field. That's a quarterback taking what a defense gives him instead of trying to be a hero on every snap. That's the kind of decision-making that keeps a starter's job long-term, not the kind that gets you a highlight and 3 sacks the following week. Now, I have to be honest with you, there was one ugly moment for Shedeur, because I'm not here to only tell you the good. He got picked off by Miles Harden after the ball came off Denzel Boston's hands. And look, I'm not putting that on Boston either. The guy is a legitimate WR1 talent, and receivers drop passes. It happens. Watch enough camp reps and you'll see it from every single receiver on that roster at some point, no exceptions. This was just a day where the ball didn't stick for him, and I'd rather tell you that honestly than pretend it didn't happen just because I like what he's shown all camp. What actually made that interception happen is a defensive play, not an offensive mistake. Grant Delpit got his hands in at the catch point, disrupted the placement right as the ball arrived, and turned a routine completion into a jump ball that Harden was able to finish. That's good defense. That's a veteran safety doing exactly what he's paid to do, closing a window most quarterbacks would consider safe. And this is precisely why I keep hammering this point. Sometimes the box score interception isn't even really about the quarterback. Sometimes it's a deflection off a receiver's hands, sometimes it's a safety making a legitimately great individual play, and sometimes it's a receiver just having one of those days everybody has occasionally. Context matters, and I think that's exactly what's missing from a lot of the coverage coming out of this camp right now. If every incompletion and every interception gets treated the same regardless of who or what actually caused it, you end up with a stat line that tells you almost nothing real about how a quarterback actually played. Which brings me to the part of this story that's honestly bigger than any single practice rep, because what's happening in the media room around this quarterback competition is starting to look like its own separate storyline. Tony Grossi put out a report claiming Todd Monken ran a specific period designed to test cadence recognition, and that Watson was able to draw the defense offside twice, while Shedeur couldn't do it at all. The framing there is, Watson wins that rep clean, Shedeur loses it. Except that's not what actually happened, according to somebody who was in that building with sourcing just as credible. Daniel Yafusi reported, on the very same day, that both Watson and Shedeur drew the defense offside during that cadence work. Both quarterbacks. Not one. 2 separate reporters, 2 completely different versions of the exact same practice period, and only one of them lines up with what the other outlet independently confirmed. That's not a difference of opinion. That's a factual claim that's either accurate or it isn't. And when you've got conflicting reports on something this specific, this checkable, it starts to look less like an honest mistake and more like a pattern. And that pattern is exactly what pushed former Browns player and current media voice G. Bush to finally say something publicly, because he's been watching this build for a while now. His point, and I think it's a fair one, is that the standard shifts depending on which quarterback is under discussion. One day an interception is treated as a serious red flag. The next day, a similar mistake from a different quarterback barely gets mentioned. He said it plainly. The bias is obvious. And he went further, saying this exact kind of selective framing is part of why local media in general gets a bad reputation among players and fans across the league, not just in Cleveland. What struck me listening to him is that he wasn't even arguing Shedeur should start over Watson or Gabriel. He was saying something different, and honestly more important. He said he has no problem with somebody having a preference. Root for whoever you want to start. What he has a problem with is using selective narratives, using cherry-picked plays and skipped context to try to manufacture a conclusion instead of just calling the position battle straight. He talked about being frozen out of access at camp, about being told information would come from one person, then getting nothing, then being redirected somewhere else and hitting another wall. And he made a point that's hard to argue with. He's someone who actually played this game at a high level. He's had real football experience that some of the established voices covering this team simply don't have, and yet he's the one getting the runaround, while narratives he considers false keep getting rewarded with platform and attention. Now step back from the individual reporters for a second, because there's a bigger organizational question buried in all of this. When a franchise has this much smoke around, who's actually earning reps, who's actually playing well, and who the media wants to be playing well? That gap becomes a distraction the coaching staff has to manage on top of an already crowded quarterback competition. Kevin Stefanski has talked openly about wanting to see quarterbacks stack good days on top of good days, understanding that in install periods against a talented defense, that kind of consistency is genuinely hard to find. He's basically said, the offense stacking great days probably means the defense isn't having one, and vice versa, so there's a natural give and take built into every single practice that outsiders don't always get to see. Some of that only shows up on the coach's tape afterward, not in real time on the practice field. That's a fair, honest coaching standard. But it only works if the plays being evaluated are actually being reported accurately, because players read this coverage too. Locker rooms absorb outside narratives, whether coaches want them to or not, and a young quarterback trying to win a job doesn't need extra noise about whether the coverage of his own practice reps can even be trusted. Think about what it does to team chemistry when one guy's mistakes get magnified and another's get buried in the same news cycle. It creates resentment that has nothing to do with actual competition and everything to do with perception management. And perception, whether we like it or not, shapes how front offices, how fan bases, and eventually how ownership groups start to think about a decision that should be made almost entirely on film. That's really what makes G. Bush's frustration land the way it does. This isn't some outsider with an agenda screaming into the void. This is someone who's actually played the position at a high level, who understands leverage reads and cadence disguises and coverage rotations well enough to know when a report doesn't match what actually happened on the field. When he says he's done more in this game than some of the people currently holding press credentials and shaping the public narrative, that's not just a shot for the sake of taking a shot. It's a legitimate question about who gets access, who gets trusted, and why the people with the most football knowledge are so often the ones locked furthest outside the room. Let's not forget the other two names in this race either, because a four-man quarterback competition doesn't collapse into a two-man storyline just because it's convenient for a headline. Dillon Gabriel going 6 of 9 without a single mistake is quietly solid work, and I think it's a mistake to write him off completely just because his sample size was smaller on Thursday. He's not making the splash plays Shedeur is making right now, but he's also not turning the ball over, and in a league where job security often comes down to who protects the football, that's not nothing. Bailey Green's usage is the one worth watching from a scheme perspective. Limited team reps, but real involvement in short yardage, goal line, and even some read option looks. That tells me the staff already sees a specific, defined role for him in mind, even if it's not a starter's workload right now. Coaches don't draw up specialty packages for players they're not planning on using. So, where does that leave things heading into day 9? On performance alone, Thursday belongs to Shedeur Sanders. 2 touchdown-caliber throws built on real pre-snap processing, a clean read-and-distribute rep to Bond, and 1 interception that had more to do with a deflection and a great individual defensive play than a mental error. Watson had a serviceable day by count, but the actual tape shows 2 throws that should have been picks, not 1, including a shot down the field that a healthier, more accurate ball turns into an explosive touchdown instead of a turnover. Gabriel stayed clean and efficient in a smaller sample. None of that alone settles a starting job. But it does tell you the eye test and the narrative floating around certain outlets are starting to drift apart, and in a competition this tight, that drift is worth paying attention to every single day it keeps happening. Here's what I'll be watching heading into Friday. Not just who throws it well, because we've established that stat sheets alone won't tell you the full story this camp. I want to see whether Shedeur can stack a second consecutive strong day against a defense that's now seen his tendencies once already, because Stefanski basically told us that's the real test, not one flashy practice in isolation. I want to see whether the coaching staff starts adjusting reps in response to what's actually on file rather than what's getting printed. And I want to see whether the reporting around this team starts closing that gap between what happened on the grass and what's showing up in the timelines, because until that happens, you and I are going to keep having to do this work ourselves, breaking down the actual routes, the actual coverages, and the actual decisions these quarterbacks are making, rather than just trusting a graphic that's already been proven wrong once this week.